The morning sun was just starting to warm the streets when she walked into the small roadside diner. It was the kind of place that smelled of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon, with the faint hint of vanilla from the pastries on display. The booths were worn but comfortable, and the staff moved around with a relaxed, friendly energy. She had been coming here for years whenever she needed a quiet spot to think, draw, or just enjoy a cup of coffee without the noise of the city. She picked her usual booth near the window, away from the door so she could watch the world outside. Her sketchbook was tucked under her arm, and she pulled out a pencil and began sketching the view from her seat. It was one of those mornings where everything seemed calm and ordinary, the kind that made her feel grounded, like nothing in the world could disturb her little bubble of peace. The first few sips of coffee were warm and comforting, and she let herself relax into the quiet hum of the diner. The tranquility didn't last long. The bell above the door jingled loudly, signaling a sudden larger presence. A group of bikers rolled in, their leather jackets creaking and boots thumping against the wooden floor. They laughed boisterously, joking with each other in a way that immediately filled the room with tension. It wasn't just the noise, it was the way they carried themselves, a mix of arrogance and confidence that demanded attention. One of the bikers, taller than the others with a dark leather jacket that looked almost like armor, walked directly toward her booth. He had that look, the one people usually avoided, which said he thought the world revolved around him. She tried to ignore him, focusing on her sketchbook, but she could feel his eyes on her. "Hey, what are you doing all alone here?" he asked, loud enough for the whole diner to hear. His tone was mocking, like he was trying to humiliate her. She didn't answer. She kept her eyes on the paper, pretending she didn't hear him. He leaned closer, a smirk on his face, clearly enjoying the power he thought he had. "What's with the notebook? Drawing your boyfriend or something?" His laughter was loud, crude, and meant to embarrass. She felt her cheeks flush, a mix of anger and humiliation rising inside her. She wanted to say something, but she knew arguing wouldn't help. She had learned long ago that people like him fed off reactions. Some of the other diners started glancing over, whispering quietly among themselves. A few looked concerned, unsure if they should intervene. Others pulled out their phones, quietly filming the situation. She noticed a few sympathetic nods, but no one stepped forward yet. What she didn't realize was that a couple of people were already watching. A few tables behind her, two men were seated casually, drinking coffee and chatting quietly. They blended in with the crowd, dressed in plain clothes, but there was something about the way they carried themselves, calm, strong, and observant, that made it clear they were not ordinary. One of them, taller and broad-shouldered, had a presence that seemed to fill the room without making a sound. The other had a quiet intensity, like someone who noticed everything and missed nothing. Neither of them made a move, but they both saw the biker leaning over her booth and knew that the situation could escalate if left unchecked. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her hands as she closed her sketchbook slowly. She didn't want him to see how nervous she felt, but inside her heart was racing. She could feel the judgmental eyes of the biker and his friends pressing on her, heavy and uncomfortable. She felt trapped in her own little world, one that had always been safe until now. "Oh, come on, don't be like that," the biker said, leaning even closer. "I'm just joking." "Don't tell me you can't take a little fun." His friends laughed, and the sound made her feel even more exposed. She knew this wasn't a joke. He wasn't here to be friendly. He was here to shame her, to make her feel small in front of everyone. She picked up her coffee cup, pretending to take a sip, giving herself a few moments to think. She needed a way out, some way to handle this without losing her composure. The last thing she wanted was to escalate the situation and draw more attention. Her mind raced through the possibilities. Ignore him, respond with words, or just leave. Any choice seemed risky, but she knew she had to remain calm. Meanwhile, the two men behind her exchanged a glance, subtle but full of understanding. They didn't need words. They knew the biker had crossed the line and that it was time to step in before things got worse. Their calm confidence was a stark contrast to the biker's loud arrogance, and it gave her a strange sense of relief, even though she didn't yet know who they were. The biker, sensing he had her attention, grew bolder. "What's your deal? You think just sitting here and drawing makes you better than everyone else? You're so boring. No wonder you're all alone." His words stung, but she kept her face neutral, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her hurt. He wasn't expecting her to remain silent. Most people would argue, scream, or at least react. But she stayed composed, gathering her belongings slowly, preparing to leave if necessary. The diner felt smaller suddenly, the laughter of the bikers echoing in her ears. She could feel the weight of the stares, the judgment and the silent expectations of everyone in the room. Then, something shifted. The biker's arrogance began to falter, not because of her but because of the presence behind him. The taller man, broad-shouldered, stood up. He didn't shout. He didn't yell. He simply placed a firm hand on the biker's shoulder. The gesture was quiet, but it carried authority. The biker froze, turning slightly, finally noticing the two men behind him. John Cena's calm, steady voice cut through the tension. "You need to back off," he said. It wasn't a threat, it was a statement. Clear, firm, and non-negotiable. The biker's smirk faltered. He glanced at the other man, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, whose eyes locked on him with quiet intensity. There was no need for words, the message was clear. For the first time, the biker realized he wasn't dealing with someone ordinary. He could feel the strength and authority radiating from these men, and it made him uneasy. His friends looked confused, unsure why the situation had suddenly changed. The energy in the diner shifted. What had been a tense, almost humiliating moment for her was now filled with a new tension, the kind that makes someone realize they've overstepped. She stayed seated, watching carefully, relief starting to creep in. She didn't know their names yet, but she could feel that she wasn't alone anymore. There were people who could stand up for her quietly but powerfully without making a scene. She sipped her coffee, grounding herself, feeling a mixture of awe and gratitude. The biker tried to recover, attempting another joke, but the confidence and calm authority of the two men behind him left him speechless. His voice cracked and his arrogance wavered. He wasn't used to being confronted in a way that demanded respect rather than fear. The other diners watched in silence, some holding their phones, unsure if they should intervene, but the atmosphere had shifted completely. The power dynamic had changed, and the biker suddenly seemed smaller than before. She could finally breathe a little easier, knowing that the situation was no longer entirely in his control. The moment stretched, heavy with unspoken tension. She realized how quickly things could have gone wrong if the two men hadn't been there. The lesson was clear. Sometimes courage and protection come from unexpected places, and standing up quietly yet firmly can change everything. She took another sip of her coffee, trying to steady her nerves, feeling the warmth of it seep into her hands and calm her mind. The biker muttered something under his breath, glanced at his friends, and finally turned away, leaving the booth and the diner behind him. She exhaled slowly, relief washing over her like a gentle wave. The two men returned to their seats behind her, calm once more, their presence still reassuring. She didn't need to thank them yet. She just watched them for a moment, taking in the fact that strangers could intervene in such a powerful and respectful way. They weren't here to show off or draw attention. They were simply doing what was right. The diner slowly returned to normal, the sounds of chatter and clinking dishes filling the air again. She picked up her sketchbook once more, hesitant at first, but then she began to draw again, letting her pencil flow across the page. The morning's tension had left an imprint, one that she would never forget, and the memory of how quiet courage can change a situation stayed with her as she sketched. For the first time that morning, she smiled. The day had started like any other, ordinary and quiet, but it had turned into something memorable. Something that reminded her of the unexpected ways people can show strength and kindness. She didn't know if the biker would ever realize the lesson he had learned, but she knew she had witnessed something rare. The quiet power of standing up for what's right, even without raising your voice. And as she finished her sketch, glancing briefly at the two men behind her, she felt a spark of hope. There were still good people in the world. People who would stand up for others without hesitation. People who reminded her that dignity and respect mattered and that sometimes the smallest acts of courage could make the biggest difference. The diner had returned to a quiet hum after the biker walked away, but the air still carried a subtle tension. She took a slow breath, trying to calm her racing heart. Even though he had left, she could feel the weight of what had just happened pressing on her mind. The realization that someone had been willing to embarrass her so publicly left a sting that wouldn't fade immediately. She set her sketchbook on the table, staring at the page blankly for a few moments. The two men behind her, calm and unassuming, returned to their seats as if nothing had happened, sipping their coffee slowly, There was no fanfare, no attempt to draw attention, but she could sense the quiet strength in their presence. It was comforting. She glanced at them briefly, then looked down at her hands. She felt a strange mix of gratitude and awe. She hadn't expected anyone to stand up for her, and certainly not in the way that had just happened. But her relief was short-lived. The biker wasn't done yet. A few moments later, he returned, this time with more swagger and a brash laugh that echoed through the diner. It was clear he had not intended to walk away quietly. He wanted one more moment to assert his dominance. His friends followed him, looking amused, but the leader's focus was entirely on her. "Thought you could get away from me, huh?" he called, leaning against the edge of her booth. His grin was forced, and there was a nervous energy in his movements that hadn't been there before. She held her ground, refusing to meet his gaze. She could feel every eye in the diner watching, waiting for what would happen next. He leaned closer, pointing a finger at her sketchbook. "What's in there? Hiding pictures of your imaginary friends?" His voice carried a cruel edge designed to make her feel small. She didn't respond, just held her cup of coffee tightly, letting the warmth soothe her fingers. The sound of the mug clinking on the table seemed louder than it should have been, marking each heartbeat that pounded in her chest. From behind him, the two men stood up again. This time, the taller one, Dwayne, leaned slightly forward, his face calm but serious. He didn't shout, didn't scold. He simply spoke in a firm, measured tone. "That's enough." The words were simple, but the way they were delivered made it impossible to ignore. The biker's smirk faltered, and he glanced over his shoulder at his friends. They looked confused, uncertain why the situation had changed so dramatically in just a few moments. The other man, John, stood beside Dwayne, his posture steady and strong. He didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. There was an unspoken authority in the way he carried himself. The biker tried to laugh it off, attempting another joke, but the laughter sounded hollow, forced. For the first time, he realized that he wasn't intimidating anyone anymore. She could feel her own fear slowly giving way to a cautious relief. She wasn't sure who these men were, but she knew they were on her side. She dared a glance toward them and noticed that their eyes were calm but alert, watching every move the biker made. There was no anger in their expressions, no desire to punish. It was something deeper, an unshakable sense of fairness, of standing up for someone who couldn't be intimidated by words alone. The biker's friends shifted uneasily, whispering to each other, sensing that the moment had changed. The leader tried one last attempt to regain control. "Relax, man, I'm just messing with her," he said, but the edge in his voice betrayed him. It wasn't just her anymore. The room had changed. He could feel it even if he couldn't name it. John spoke again, calm but firm. "Mocking someone for no reason isn't joking. It's disrespectful, and it's not welcome here." The simplicity of the statement carried weight. There was no anger, no threat, just truth. The biker's bravado wavered, and he started to glance around, noticing that several of the diner's patrons were watching him. Some had their phones out, quietly recording. Others simply stared, their expressions a mix of curiosity and judgment. She realized how quickly the power dynamics had shifted. What had begun as a humiliating situation for her was now turning against him. He had expected silence and submission, but instead he faced calm authority and quiet observation. The contrast between his loud arrogance and their composed presence made him look small, even in front of his own friends. The biker tried to regain control by leaning closer to her booth again, but this time Dwayne stepped forward slightly, placing a firm but non-threatening hand on his arm. The gesture wasn't aggressive, it was a boundary, a clear signal that his behavior was unacceptable. The biker froze, blinking rapidly, unsure how to respond. His friends shuffled awkwardly, muttering under their breath. She could feel the tension in the diner reaching a peak. Everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The biker's mouth opened, and he tried one last weak insult, but it fell flat. There was no laughter, no support from anyone, not even from his own friends. The room was quiet except for the faint clinking of dishes and the hum of the coffee machine. For a moment she considered speaking up, but she realized she didn't need to. The two men behind her were handling it with a quiet, unwavering authority that left no room for argument. She felt a strange sense of pride and relief. Pride because she had stayed composed, and relief because she had allies she hadn't even known she had. The biker's smirk disappeared entirely. He looked at Dwayne and John, and for the first time there was hesitation in his posture. He tried to shrug it off, attempting to act casual, but his movements were stiff, unnatural. It was clear that he was starting to understand that this was not the place to continue his antics. Then, as if to punctuate the moment, Dwayne spoke again, his voice calm, but carrying undeniable authority. "If you can't treat people with respect, you should leave." John echoed the sentiment, his tone steady and unwavering. The message was simple, clear, and final. The biker looked around, noticing the diners watching, the recording phones, and the quiet but powerful presence of the two men behind her. He realized he had lost control completely. His friends, sensing the shift, began nudging him, urging him to leave. Without another word, he muttered something under his breath and finally turned, storming out of the diner with his group following behind. The sound of the bell above the door jingled sharply as they left, leaving a sense of calm in their wake. She exhaled slowly, relief washing over her in waves. The threat was gone, and she could finally sit back and let herself relax. Her hands were still shaking slightly from the adrenaline, but the warmth of the coffee and the calm presence of the two men helped ground her. She looked toward them, feeling a deep sense of gratitude, though she didn't speak immediately. Dwayne smiled briefly, a small nod acknowledging her, and John gave a friendly gesture with his hand. There was no need for words. The moment had passed, and the simple human connection was enough. She felt an unspoken reassurance. Sometimes courage and kindness appear when you least expect them. The diner slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Servers resumed their routines. Conversations picked up again, and the clatter of dishes filled the room. Yet the memory of what had happened lingered like a quiet echo. She realized that courage didn't always roar. Sometimes it was quiet, composed, and steady. And that kind of courage had changed the course of her morning completely. She picked up her sketchbook once more, her fingers tracing the pencil lightly over the blank page. She didn't feel the same fear she had felt earlier. Instead, there was a strange, empowering sense of calm. The morning had started like any other, ordinary and unremarkable, but it had transformed into a moment she would never forget, a reminder that standing up for yourself and having allies in unexpected places could make all the difference. She glanced back toward the two men once more, noting their calm demeanor and the quiet confidence in their eyes. They didn't seek recognition or praise, but their actions spoke louder than words ever could. In that simple human interaction, she saw the kind of strength that wasn't about dominance or intimidation. It was about fairness, courage, and respect. As she returned her attention to her sketchbook, she felt the tension of the morning slowly fading. The biker's words no longer had power over her. Instead, she focused on capturing the moment, the lesson, the relief, the unexpected kindness. Each line she drew reflected the shift from fear to strength, from humiliation to empowerment. By the time she finished her coffee, she felt lighter, more grounded, and more aware of the quiet strength that can exist in ordinary people. The morning had started as a routine, quiet moment, but it had grown into a lesson she would carry with her forever. Courage, she realized, often appears quietly, in ways that are unexpected but unforgettable. Even after the biker and his group had left, the tension in the diner didn't completely fade. The sound of the door jingling as they exited seemed to echo in her mind, leaving a lingering sense of unease. She sat back in her seat, sipping the last of her coffee, trying to steady her shaking hands. The adrenaline from the confrontation had left her heart racing, and she could still feel the sting of humiliation creeping in. She had stayed calm, yes, but the memory of his mocking words refused to fade. The two men behind her remained seated, casually talking in low voices as if nothing had happened, but she could feel their awareness. Every so often their eyes would flick up, scanning the diner, making sure the situation was truly over. There was no arrogance in them, no show of strength, just quiet vigilance. It was almost comforting, the way they maintained their calm while clearly being capable of handling anything. She noticed the way the other diners were looking at her. Some were smiling encouragingly, as if acknowledging her composure. Others were whispering to each other, probably recounting the biker's embarrassment, though she didn't focus on them. She tried to return to her sketches, but the words of the biker had left a mark she couldn't ignore. He had tried to make her feel small, to shame her for simply existing in a space without anyone to protect her, or so he thought. Then, unexpectedly, the diner door opened again. Her eyes darted up, her heart sinking for a moment, expecting the biker to return. But it wasn't him. It was a delivery man, carrying a tray of fresh pastries, and behind him 2 teenagers came in quietly. The movement reminded her that life continued, that the diner was just a place full of ordinary people living ordinary mornings. Still, her mind remained alert, tense as if expecting another confrontation. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. The tension in her shoulders slowly eased as she sipped her coffee again. But the memory of the biker's arrogance remained, gnawing at her. It wasn't just his words. It was the boldness, the public humiliation he had tried to create. It could have easily ruined her morning, maybe even her day, if the 2 men behind her hadn't intervened. They were quiet, almost unnoticeable, but she felt their presence keenly. Dwayne, with his broad shoulders and calm demeanor, seemed to radiate strength without effort. John, sitting beside him, had an intensity in his gaze, a quiet awareness that nothing escaped his notice. She realized that their intervention hadn't just stopped the biker, it had changed the entire mood of the room. The diner felt safer, lighter, as if their presence alone could protect anyone who needed it. The biker's friends were the first to break the silence, whispering nervously as they left. She didn't hear their words clearly, but their body language spoke volumes. They were unsure, intimidated even by the quiet authority of the men behind her. It was a reminder that arrogance could be deflated without anger or violence, simply by standing firm and calm. Her sketchbook lay open in front of her, but she didn't pick up her pencil immediately. Instead, she watched the 2 men, noticing the subtle way they interacted. They weren't showing off or seeking praise. They were just observing, ensuring that the situation had truly ended. It struck her how rare that kind of integrity was, how unusual it was to see people act not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden commotion near the diner's entrance. The biker, it seemed, hadn't accepted defeat entirely. He had returned, but this time his approach was cautious, almost hesitant. He paused at the door, scanning the room, perhaps realizing that his previous attempt had failed. His friend stayed behind him, unsure how to proceed. The atmosphere thickened again, and she felt her heart rate quicken. Dwayne noticed the movement immediately and rose from his seat with quiet authority. John followed suit, positioning himself beside his friend. There was no rush, no show of aggression, just a steady, calm presence that radiated confidence. The biker saw them, and the bravado that had fueled his previous actions faltered. He tried to mask it with a weak smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. She could feel the fear of embarrassment and failure emanating from him, and it gave her a strange sense of relief. She had not expected him to return, yet she wasn't afraid anymore. The 2 men behind her had created a shield of calm authority that made her feel safe, grounded, and in control. She realized that courage wasn't always about shouting or fighting. It could be about standing firm, quietly, in a way that made others reconsider their choices. The biker took a few tentative steps toward her booth, but Dwayne's voice stopped him in its tracks. "Leave her alone. You're not welcome here if you can't act respectfully." The words were simple but resonated throughout the diner. They didn't scream or shout. They just stated the truth. Respect was not optional. The biker's smirk faltered, and his friends shuffled nervously. Realizing that the situation had completely shifted against them, John added, his tone steady, "Publicly shaming someone for no reason doesn't make you strong. It shows weakness, and it's not tolerated here." His words carried weight, not because they were loud, but because they were backed by calm confidence and undeniable authority. The biker's eyes widened slightly, and he glanced around the diner. Every patron was watching, some holding their phones, recording silently. The power of witnesses weighed on him more than any words could have. She felt a mix of relief and awe. She had faced public humiliation, yet the presence of these 2 men transformed the entire situation. Their intervention was not about confrontation for its own sake. It was about protection, about restoring balance. She realized that this was something she would never forget. The lesson was simple but profound. Courage and respect could triumph over arrogance without raising a hand or a voice unnecessarily. The biker tried once more to assert himself, leaning slightly toward her booth and speaking in a forced, uneven voice. "Come on, it's just a joke. Don't be so serious." But there was no conviction in his tone. His body language was stiff, his movements cautious. He knew deep down that his antics were no longer welcome. Dwayne stepped forward slightly, his hand resting lightly on the biker's arm, not in aggression, but as a gentle reminder of boundaries. The biker froze again, realizing that he could not intimidate anyone here. John stood beside Dwayne, his gaze unwavering, calm but powerful. The biker's friends whispered urgently, nudging him toward the exit. Finally, he muttered under his breath and turned to leave, followed closely by his hesitant friends. The bell above the door jingled sharply as they exited, leaving the diner in a stunned silence. It was as if the room itself had been holding its breath, and now that the danger was gone, the tension slowly dissipated. She exhaled slowly, relief washing over her. Her hands no longer shook as much, and she felt her heartbeat return to a more normal rhythm. The fear and embarrassment that had weighed on her felt lighter now. She had survived the ordeal, and the unexpected kindness and courage of strangers had made all the difference. The two men returned to their seats, their calm demeanor unchanged. They did not boast or demand thanks, but she felt a deep gratitude that words could not fully express. They had intervened not for recognition, but simply because it was the right thing to do. That quiet strength left a lasting impression on her. She picked up her sketchbook once more, this time with renewed focus. The pencil moved across the page, capturing not just the scene but the emotions, the fear, the tension, the courage, and the relief. She wanted to remember every detail, every lesson. Courage could appear quietly, unexpectedly, and still have the power to change everything. As she sketched, she reflected on the entire experience. It had started as a normal morning with coffee and quiet reflection. It had turned into a moment of humiliation and fear, only to transform again into a lesson in courage, respect, and human kindness. She realized that life often placed unexpected challenges in front of people, and how those challenges were met could define moments, and even shape the way they saw the world. The diner gradually returned to its normal rhythm. The conversations of other patrons, the clatter of dishes, and the hum of the coffee machine created a comforting background. Yet the memory of the confrontation lingered, a reminder of how quickly life could change and how important it was to have courage, even if it came quietly, from unexpected sources. By the time she finished her sketch, she felt a profound sense of empowerment. The morning had begun with quiet solitude and ended with a powerful lesson in resilience, compassion, and the unexpected presence of heroes. She would remember it not just as a moment of confrontation, but as a moment of transformation, proof that respect and courage could triumph over arrogance without a single raised hand or angry word. The diner had slowly returned to its usual rhythm, the clatter of dishes, the hum of conversations, and the aroma of coffee and freshly baked pastries filling the air. She sat quietly at her booth, her hands wrapped around the warm mug of coffee, feeling a mix of exhaustion and relief. The confrontation with the biker was over, but the emotions it stirred were still present: fear, tension, and a sense of vulnerability. At the same time, there was a strange warmth, a feeling of safety thanks to the quiet intervention of the two men behind her. She glanced over her shoulder at them. Dwayne and John were casually sipping their coffee, chatting in low voices as if nothing extraordinary had happened. There was no hint of pride or self-importance in their posture, just a calm, steady presence that radiated reassurance. It was remarkable, she thought, how people could command respect and create a sense of safety without raising their voices or showing off. The biker had left, but his impact lingered. Some of the diners whispered among themselves, still discussing the incident. A few had recorded parts of the confrontation on their phones, though she wasn't sure what they intended to do with the footage. She felt a pang of discomfort at the thought of it being online, but she reminded herself that the story was no longer about humiliation. It was about courage, fairness, and standing up for what's right. She returned her attention to her sketchbook, picking up her pencil. Her hand trembled slightly at first, but soon she found her rhythm, sketching the scene she had just lived through. Her lines were hesitant at first, but then became confident, capturing not only the visuals but the emotions, the tension, the fear, the quiet authority of the two men, and the eventual relief. Each stroke of the pencil helped her process the morning, turning chaos into clarity. Dwayne leaned slightly forward, speaking quietly to John, though she could catch fragments of their conversation. They were talking about ordinary things, sports, schedules, small plans for the day. Nothing about fame or heroics, nothing about the intervention that had just occurred. That casual demeanor made her admire them even more. The way they acted was natural, human, and entirely unpretentious. It reminded her that courage wasn't about showmanship. It was about integrity, and the choice to act when it mattered most. She noticed a few of the diner staff lingering nearby, whispering quietly to each other. The way they looked at her was different now, respectful, as if acknowledging her calm composure during the ordeal. One of the servers approached, offering a gentle smile. "Are you okay?" they asked. She nodded, managing a small smile in return. She didn't need to explain anything. The staff had witnessed enough to understand. The morning continued to pass, and slowly, the diner returned to normal. Families came in, orders were taken, coffee was poured, and conversations resumed. Yet beneath the normalcy, she felt the lingering lesson of the incident. It was not just about the biker or his behavior. It was about standing up, being composed, and observing the quiet power of integrity and courage. She realized that these were qualities that could be learned, practiced, and embodied in everyday life. She glanced back at the two men behind her. Dwayne noticed and offered a friendly nod, one that said without words, "It's all okay now." She felt a wave of gratitude. Not the kind of gratitude that required grand gestures, but the simple, quiet kind. The kind that comes from realizing someone else's actions had made a real difference in your life. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of laughter from a nearby table. A small group of friends had come in, chatting and joking about nothing in particular. She felt a smile creep across her face. The tension of the morning was fading, replaced by a sense of normalcy and comfort. The world was moving on just as it always did, and she could move on with it. Dwayne and John stood up at one point, stretching slightly, and she realized that their calm presence had been a stabilizing force not only for her, but for everyone in the diner. The biker's arrogance had been deflated, his friends intimidated, and the staff and patrons reassured, all without a single display of anger or aggression. It was a remarkable display of subtle power, one that relied on composure, empathy, and a quiet sense of justice. She returned her gaze to the sketchbook. The pencil moved more freely now, capturing the faces of the people in the diner, the subtle expressions of concern and relief, and the small moments of human connection that had unfolded around her. The morning had been more than a simple visit to a diner. It had been a lesson in courage, respect, and the unexpected ways kindness could manifest. Her coffee had long since cooled, but she didn't mind. She felt grounded, centered in a way she hadn't expected. The confrontation with the biker had been terrifying, but it had also been enlightening. It showed her that the world was not only a place where cruelty existed, it was also a place where ordinary people could do extraordinary things simply by choosing to act with integrity. At one point, she caught Dwayne glancing at her sketches. He offered a subtle nod of approval, not as a performance, but as a genuine acknowledgement. John, too, looked over briefly, offering a small, friendly smile. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of relief, pride, and admiration. It wasn't just the sketches. It was the recognition of the shared human experience, of people noticing and valuing courage and composure in moments of difficulty. Time seemed to slow down in the diner. The sun had climbed higher, casting a warm glow through the windows. Outside, the world was moving as usual. Cars passing by, pedestrians walking, the city alive with its usual energy. Inside, however, there was a sense of calm, of restored balance. She realized that the incident with the biker, as unsettling as it had been, had created a moment of clarity. It showed her the value of standing firm, the importance of integrity, and the quiet power of intervening when someone else is being wronged. Her thoughts drifted to the biker again. She wondered if he would ever understand the lesson he had been given. Perhaps he would, perhaps he wouldn't. But that wasn't her concern. What mattered was that she had been supported, protected, and reminded of the goodness that existed in the world. That was a lesson worth holding on to. She spent a few more minutes sketching, capturing not only the events but the emotions, the fear, the tension, the relief, and the calm strength of the two men who had changed the course of her morning. Each line on the page was a reminder of what had happened, a visual representation of courage, empathy, and the unexpected ways human beings can act when it matters most. As she packed up her sketchbook and stood to leave, she felt a sense of closure. The morning's events were behind her, but the lessons would stay. She had witnessed something rare, the quiet power of standing up for others, the subtle authority of people who acted with integrity, and the human capacity for kindness even in unexpected situations. The two men stood as she passed, offering brief, friendly nods. She smiled back, feeling a sense of connection that didn't require words. It was enough to know that they had been there, that they had acted, and that their actions had made a real difference. She stepped out into the sunlight, taking a deep breath. The world outside felt a little brighter, a little safer, a little more full of possibility. The biker and his cruelty were behind her, replaced by a reminder that courage and respect could exist in quiet, ordinary ways. And sometimes those quiet acts of strength had the power to change everything. As she walked away from the diner, she felt a renewed sense of confidence. The morning had been a test, a moment of fear and tension, but it had also been a demonstration of the goodness that could exist in the world. She knew she would carry the lesson with her, the value of composure, integrity, and the unexpected heroes who appeared when needed most. And in that moment, she realized something important. Courage didn't have to be loud to be powerful. Respect didn't need to be demanded. It could be given and defended quietly, firmly, and with unwavering conviction. And kindness, even in its quietest form, could leave a lasting mark on someone's life. The morning had fully passed now, and the diner had settled into its usual rhythm. People were coming and going, chatting with friends, waiting for their orders, and enjoying the quiet comfort of a place that felt ordinary and safe. She sat near the window, her sketchbook closed in front of her, her coffee long finished, yet her mind was still buzzing from the events that had unfolded. The biker, his arrogance, and the intervention of the two men behind her, all replayed in her thoughts like a scene she could not stop examining. She felt a mix of relief and gratitude. Relief because the confrontation had ended without further incident, and gratitude because, for reasons she did not yet fully understand, strangers had stepped in to protect her. The two men had not made a show of their heroism. There was no drama, no loud declarations, just a quiet, firm act that had shifted the entire dynamic of the room. That quietness had power, and she could not stop thinking about it. Outside, the sun was high in the sky now, casting warm light through the diner windows. The city seemed alive, bustling with its usual noise and energy, but she felt a sense of calm. The world had continued even while chaos had touched her morning, and that realization brought a strange sense of clarity. Life could be unpredictable and unfair, she thought, but moments of kindness and courage could appear in the most unexpected ways, altering everything. She glanced at the two men behind her. They were packing their things now, preparing to leave. Dwayne gave a small nod and John offered a gentle smile. There was no expectation of thanks, no demand for recognition. Their actions had been deliberate, thoughtful, and human, and it left her with a sense of awe. She had witnessed integrity and courage firsthand, and it was a lesson she knew she would carry forever. As they stood and left the diner, the other patrons seemed to notice the quiet shift they left behind. Conversations resumed, and the normal clatter of the diner returned. But there was an underlying sense that something remarkable had just occurred. People who had been silently observing felt the weight of what had happened, a reminder that human behavior, both good and bad, could leave lasting impressions on those who witnessed it. She packed her sketchbook into her bag, her fingers lingering on the cover. The sketches she had made captured more than images. They captured emotions, the fear, tension, and embarrassment she had felt, the quiet authority and calm presence of the men who had intervened, and finally, the relief and sense of safety that had followed. Each page told a story, a reminder that courage did not always roar, but it could move mountains in the quietest ways. Her phone buzzed, breaking her thoughts. It was a message from a friend, asking how her morning had gone. She smiled, too,